Living a normal life might seem like the safe choice, but French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would warn you it's actually the most dangerous thing you can do. While everyone around you is desperately trying to fit in, Sartre discovered a shocking truth about normality that would change philosophy forever. It's actually a form of self-destruction. Today we'll explore why trying to be normal is killing your soul, and what Sartre suggests you do instead. Think about your morning routine. You wake up, check Instagram, and suddenly feel the urge to buy that green smoothie everyone's drinking, or copy that workout everyone's doing. You carefully pick your outfit to match what's trendy, and on your way to work, you catch yourself practicing your professional voice for the meeting. These aren't random habits. They're signs of what Sartre saw as a modern tragedy. In 1941, Sartre watched as Paris fell under Nazi control. But what shocked him wasn't just the occupation, it was how quickly people adapted to it, how easily they convinced themselves this was the new normal. He saw his neighbors, friends, and colleagues slowly changing their behaviors, their opinions, even their personalities, just to fit in with what was now considered normal. This observation hit him like a lightning bolt. People weren't being forced to change, they were choosing to change, and that was far more terrifying. But here's where it gets interesting. Sartre noticed something bizarre in the local cafe he frequented. He watched the waiter, who moved with exaggerated gestures, speaking in an overly polite tone, almost like he was playing a character in a play. The waiter wasn't just doing his job, he was performing what he thought a waiter should be. This seemingly simple observation led Sartre to one of his most powerful insights. We're not just following social rules. We're actually erasing ourselves to become what we think society wants us to be. Fast forward to today, and Sartre's warning hits even harder. Scroll through LinkedIn, and you'll see thousands of people performing their professional self. Open TikTok, and you'll find millions copying the same dance, using the same phrases, trying to fit into the same narrow box of what's considered normal. We're not just sharing content, we're slowly erasing our real selves to become more like everyone else. But here's the real kicker that Sartre noticed. The more normal you try to be, the more you feel like a fraud. That nagging feeling you get when you post a perfectly filtered photo that doesn't really look like you. That discomfort when you laugh at your boss's joke that isn't funny. That's not just awkwardness. According to Sartre, that's your authentic self screaming for help, begging you to stop the slow death of conformity. This isn't just philosophical theory. It's happening right now, in ways that would have fascinated Sartre. When faced with a job interview, most people don't prepare to show their real selves. They prepare to become what they think an ideal candidate should be. Dating apps have turned people into carefully curated products, each profile looking increasingly similar as everyone copies what seems to work. Even our dreams have become standardized. The house, the car, the career path, all chosen not because we truly want them, but because that's what we're told represents success. The cost of this normality isn't just your uniqueness, it's your entire existence. And as we'll see, Sartre's solution to this problem isn't just about being different, it's about something far more radical and liberating. Let's dive into how Sartre came to these earth-shattering realizations about normality and conformity. Picture Paris, 1941. The Nazi forces have taken over, and Sartre is sitting in his usual spot at his favorite cafe, Café de Flore. But he's not just drinking coffee, he's watching something that would shape his entire philosophy. Every day, he witnessed something that made his stomach turn. His fellow Parisians, proud and independent people, started making small changes to fit in with the new regime. It started innocently enough. People changed how they dressed, modified their daily routines, adjusted their language. But then came the bigger changes. Friends stopped greeting certain neighbors. Shopkeepers put up new signs. People began repeating propaganda as if it was their own opinion. But here's what really got to Sartre. Nobody was holding a gun to their heads forcing them to change. Sure, there was pressure, but people were actively choosing to transform themselves. They weren't just acting different, they were becoming different. And they were doing it with a frighteningly cheerful efficiency. One day, Sartre watched as a respected professor he knew walked into the cafe. Before the occupation, this man had been outspoken, brave, full of original ideas. Now, just 6 months later, He was carefully measuring every word. His entire personality shrunk down to what was acceptable. The professor hadn't been threatened or arrested. He had simply chosen to become normal under the new rules. This hit Sartre hard because he realized something crucial. The greatest threat to human freedom isn't always obvious oppression. It's our willingness to imprison ourselves in normality. The professor hadn't lost his freedom to speak. He had given it up, wrapped it nicely, and handed it over with a polite smile. But it was that waiter at Café de Flore who really made everything click for Sartre. Every day, he watched this waiter perform his job with exaggerated movements. The too perfect bow, the overly graceful way he carried trays, the artificial tone in his voice. The waiter wasn't just doing his job. He had turned himself into a caricature of what he thought a waiter should be. He had given up his humanity to become a role, a function, a normal waiter. Think about how this plays out today. We're not under military occupation, but we're occupied by something just as powerful, the tyranny of social expectations. When you're in a meeting at work, aren't you performing normal employee just like that waiter? When you're on a first date, aren't you playing the role of normal dating person? Even when you're alone scrolling through social media, aren't you constantly comparing yourself to what's considered normal? The stakes here are massive. Every time you choose normality over authenticity, you're not just making a small compromise. You're participating in what Sartre would call your own disappearance. It's like slowly erasing yourself, pixel by pixel, until the real you becomes so faint it's almost invisible. And here's the truly terrifying part. Just like those Parisians in 1941, we're doing this voluntarily. Nobody's forcing us to all dress the same way, like the same things, or pursue the same goals. We're choosing to become normal because the alternative, being genuinely ourselves, seems too scary, too risky, too different from what everyone else is doing. But as Sartre watched his city transform under the weight of conformity, he didn't just identify the problem, he found a way out. A path to freedom that starts with understanding exactly why we're so afraid of being different and what we can do about it. The urge to be normal is buried so deep in us that we often don't even notice it happening. Let's explore what Sartre called bad faith. But don't worry, we'll keep it real and practical. It's basically a fancy term for lying to yourself about who you really are. Picture this. You're at work and there's that one person who seems to speak entirely in corporate buzzwords. Let's circle back. Let's touch base. Let's deep dive into this. Now, here's the weird part. A few years ago, they didn't talk like this at all. But slowly, day by day, they convinced themselves this is who they really are. Sartre would look at this person and see a perfect example of someone trapped in bad faith. But it gets even stranger. Open Instagram right now, and you'll see thousands of people posting almost identical photos. Same poses, same filters, same captions. It's not just copying. It's what Sartre would call a mass surrender of authenticity. People aren't just posting these photos. They're slowly molding their entire personalities around what gets likes. That breakfast photo isn't just a photo. It's you slowly turning yourself into what you think a normal, successful person should be. Dating apps take this to a whole new level. Sartre would have a field day with Tinder. People literally transform themselves into a product, using the same angles, the same jokes, the same interests. Loves traveling, coffee, and adventures. Sound familiar? We're not just describing ourselves anymore. We're erasing our unique qualities to become a marketable version of normal. Here's where it gets personal. Think about the last time you were in a job interview. Did you show up as yourself, or did you become a character called perfect employee? You know, the one who's passionate about synergy, and whose biggest weakness is that they work too hard. Sartre would say you're not just playing a role, you're actively participating in your own disappearance. And this goes way deeper than just surface behavior. Have you ever stopped to question why you want that promotion, or that house in the suburbs, or that particular car? Sartre would bet that half the things you're chasing aren't even your own desires. They're just what you think a normal, successful person should want. Let's get even more real. When was the last time you said something at a meeting, and the moment it left your mouth, you knew those weren't really your words? They were just what you thought a professional should say. Or maybe you've caught yourself laughing at jokes you don't find funny, just to seem normal. That uncomfortable feeling in your gut when you do these things, That's not social anxiety. That's your authentic self gagging on the poison of normality. But here's the real punch in the gut. The more you play these roles, the more they become you. That work personality starts bleeding into your real life. Those Instagram poses become your actual personality. The mask grows into your skin until you can't tell where the performance ends, and the real you begins. Sartre saw this happening all around him. Just like those Instagram influencers all morphing into the same person, he watched as unique individuals slowly transformed into copies of what society expected. The transformation was so smooth, so gradual, that most people didn't even realize it was happening. They just woke up one day, looked in the mirror, and couldn't quite remember who they were before they became normal. But don't worry, this isn't just a horror story about conformity. Understanding this trap is actually the first step to escaping it, because once you see how you're erasing yourself, you can start the process of bringing yourself back. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. The terrifying but liberating path of choosing to be yourself in a world obsessed with normality. The most terrifying thing about freedom is that it's always there, waiting for us. Sartre nailed this when he said we're condemned to be free. It sounds dramatic, but think about it. Every minute of every day, you're choosing who to be. That's not just scary, it's absolutely terrifying. Let's break down why freedom freaks us out so much. Imagine you're sitting in a meeting at work, bored out of your mind. Sartre would tell you that in that moment, you're completely free to stand up, declare, "This meeting is pointless," and walk out. Nothing physically stops you. No chains, no locks. Just social rules that you've agreed to follow. The wild part? This makes most people more uncomfortable than if they were actually chained to their chairs. Here's a real example that Sartre used. The fear of standing at the edge of a cliff. What really scares us isn't just falling. It's the knowledge that we could choose to jump. Nothing stops us except our own choice. This same terror shows up in everyday life. Ever felt that weird urge to scream in a quiet library? Or say the totally wrong thing in an important situation? That's not random. That's you becoming aware of your terrifying freedom. But it gets deeper. Think about your job. Maybe you're a lawyer or a teacher or work in tech. Sartre would say there's no such thing as being born to be any of these things. You weren't destined to do your job. You're choosing it every single day. And you could choose something completely different tomorrow. That thought makes most people want to crawl under their desk and hide. Let's talk about relationships. Ever stayed in a relationship that wasn't working because it felt normal or expected? Sartre would point out that you're choosing to stay every single day. The excuse, "I had no choice," is never true. You always have a choice, and that's exactly what makes it so scary. Social media adds a whole new layer to this. Every post, every like, every share is a choice. But it's easier to just go with what's trending, to post what everyone else is posting. Because if we're just copying others, we don't have to take responsibility for our choices. It's comfortable to say, "Everyone's doing it," rather than, "I chose to do this." Here's where Sartre gets really interesting. He noticed that people will go to incredible lengths to avoid admitting their freedom. They'll blame their parents, their circumstances, their job, society. Anything to avoid facing the fact that they're choosing their life path. "I have to work this job. I have bills to pay," sounds better than, "I'm choosing this job over other possible options." Take dating apps again. People often say, "I have to use them. That's how dating works now." But Sartre would call this out as another escape from freedom. You don't have to use them. You're choosing to use them. You're choosing to participate in that specific way of meeting people. And acknowledging that choice is terrifying. The anxiety gets even worse when we realize that not choosing is also a choice. Sitting on your couch scrolling through Netflix for hours, that's a choice. Not pursuing that dream job, also a choice. Staying silent when you see something wrong, you guessed it, that's a choice too. But here's the twist. Understanding this anxiety isn't about making you feel bad. It's actually the first step toward real freedom. Because once you accept that you're choosing everything you do, you can start making conscious choices instead of hiding behind what's normal. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. How to embrace this terrifying freedom and use it to build an authentic life. Because as scary as freedom is, the alternative is much scarier. Living a life that isn't really yours. Living authentically isn't just about being different. It's about taking what Sartre called radical responsibility for your life. But don't let that fancy term scare you. It's actually pretty simple, even if it's not easy. Let's break down how to actually do this. First, let's look at what radical responsibility means in real life. Think about someone who complains about their job every single day. We all know that person. The typical response is just find a new job. But Sartre would say something different. He'd point out that by complaining, they're actually choosing to stay in that job every single day. The radical part? Accepting that staying is your choice makes you responsible for your own misery. Here's a modern example that would fascinate Sartre. People often say, social media makes me feel bad about myself. But look closer. Nobody's forcing you to scroll through Instagram at 2 a.m. comparing your life to influencers. You're choosing that pain. The liberation comes when you accept this. Suddenly, you're not a victim of social media. You're someone who can choose differently. Let's get practical. Start with small moments of authenticity. Next time you're in a meeting and everyone's nodding along to a bad idea, try saying what you actually think. Not rudely, just honestly. It's terrifying at first. Your heart might race, but here's what often happens. Other people were thinking the same thing. They were just trapped in the comfort of normality. Take relationships. We're taught there's a normal timeline. Dating, moving in, marriage, kids. But Sartre would say this timeline is killing authentic love. He saw couples following this script without ever asking themselves what they actually wanted. The solution? Start with brutal honesty. If you don't want kids, say it. If traditional marriage isn't for you, admit it. Yes, you might lose some relationships, but the ones you keep will be real. Here's where it gets interesting. Authentic living often looks like failure at first. Sartre noticed that people who started living genuinely often seemed to mess up their lives by normal standards. They quit stable jobs to start risky businesses. They ended perfect on paper relationships. They said unpopular things. But over time, something fascinating happened. They built lives that actually fit them, not just lives that looked good to others. Money and success are where this gets really challenging. Society has a very clear image of what success looks like. High salary, nice car, big house. But Sartre would ask, whose definition of success are you chasing? He saw countless people achieve normal success and feel completely empty. The trick? Figure out what success actually means to you. Maybe it's having time to read or travel or spend with family. Maybe it's making less money but doing work you believe in. Let's talk about fear. Everyone pushing against normality feels it. But Sartre noticed something crucial. The fear of being different is actually less painful than the slow death of pretending to be normal. Think about it like ripping off a Band-Aid. The quick pain of authenticity hurts less than the long ache of living a lie. Social media deserves special attention here. Want to live authentically? Start by being honest online. Post your real thoughts, not just what will get likes. Share your actual life, not just the highlight reel. Will you lose followers? Probably. But as Sartre would say, better to have 10 real connections than 1,000 fake ones. Here's a powerful exercise Sartre might suggest today. Write down all your I have to statements. I have to get married by 30. I have to buy a house. I have to get promoted. Now change each have to choose to and see how it feels. This simple switch reveals how many of our necessities are actually choices. But the most important part? You don't have to do this all at once. Start small. Choose one area of your life to be more authentic in. Maybe it's your relationships. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's just being honest about what movies you actually enjoy. The key is to start somewhere. Because here's what Sartre ultimately realized. The path to authentic living isn't about making perfect choices. It's about making your own choices and accepting responsibility for them. And once you start, something amazing happens. The fear of being different slowly gets replaced by the joy of being real. The truth about authentic living isn't just Sartre's discovery. Throughout history, great thinkers have been warning us about the trap of normality. Take Friedrich Nietzsche, who spotted this problem years before Sartre. He saw how people were becoming what he called the herd, all following each other like sheep, too afraid to stand out. Sound familiar? It's basically Instagram, just 150 years earlier. But here's where it gets really interesting. Søren Kierkegaard, another philosopher who deeply influenced Sartre, noticed something crucial. The more people tried to be normal, the more anxious they became. He watched as people in Copenhagen society tried desperately to fit in, only to be plagued by a gnawing feeling that something was wrong. Today, psychologists call this social anxiety, but Kierkegaard saw it for what it really was: the pain of denying your true self. Modern research actually backs this up. Studies show that people who constantly try to conform to social expectations have higher rates of depression and anxiety. One famous study followed a group of people for 10 years and found something fascinating. Those who lived authentically, even if they faced criticism, ended up significantly happier than those who played it safe and normal. Look at successful people who broke the mold. Steve Jobs was called crazy for thinking people would want personal computers. People laughed at Netflix when they suggested streaming was the future. What made them succeed wasn't just their ideas, it was their willingness to be abnormal. They chose authenticity over acceptance, and it paid off. Even in nature, we see this pattern. Evolution doesn't favor the normal, it favors the different. Every major advancement in species came from mutations, from being different. Yet somehow, we've convinced ourselves that being normal is the safe choice. So what can you do right now to break free from normality? Here are 3 practical steps that Sartre would approve of. First, start questioning everything you think you should do. Every time you hear yourself say, "I should," ask yourself, says who? You might be surprised how many of your life's shoulds aren't actually your own ideas. Second, practice small acts of authenticity. Maybe it's wearing that outfit everyone says is too much. Maybe it's admitting you don't actually like superhero movies. Start small, but start somewhere. Finally, embrace the discomfort. When you step away from normality, it feels weird at first. That's good. That discomfort is the feeling of your authentic self breaking free from the prison of normality. But here's the most important thing to remember. This isn't about being different just to be different. It's about being true to yourself, even when that makes you different. As Sartre would say, the goal isn't to be abnormal. The goal is to be real. Think about it this way: every morning you wake up with a choice. You can choose to be normal, to fit in, to disappear into the crowd, or you can choose to be yourself, to stand out, to be real. It might be scary, it might be uncomfortable, but as Sartre discovered, it's the only way to truly be alive. So next time someone tells you to be normal, remember this: normal is just another word for invisible, and you weren't born to disappear. The question isn't whether you'll be different, you already are. The question is whether you'll have the courage to show it. What will you choose?